So our last panel of today, I'm very excited to introduce because we entitled this Building a Better Bar. And this part of our program satisfies the H&D credit. And this year, the MTLA, we have members of the bar as panelists, but we also have members from the law school here to help us out, which hopefully is a unique and different approach to our H&D credit. So I'm going to introduce Tom Douglas, who's a colleague and fellow board member of the MTLA, who's going to chair this panel. Thanks so much.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed the program this morning so far. I'm Tom Douglas. I'm a partner at Douglas, McDaniel & Campo. I am a co-chair of the MTLA's new Racial Justice Committee. I am also co-chair of the new Maine State Bar Association BIPOC section, along with Carlos Diaz, who's on this panel. We have a great panel today, very diverse in terms of practice and geographic area. We have experienced prosecutors, we have folks from the public sector, private sector. We have some law students here, and we have somebody who just graduated. So it's sort of a diversity of perspectives. And what we're here to talk to you folks about this morning is what life looks like for BIPOC folks that deal with the BIPOC community in Maine's legal system or in Maine's legal community. What does the prospect of practicing law in Maine look like to the BIPOC community? What are our experiences? What is our perspective on this? And so I thought we'd start by introducing, we're letting the members of our distinguished panel introduce themselves. Maybe we start with Carlos.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, everyone. My name's Carlos Diaz. With Tom, I'm co-chair of the new BIPOC section, and very happy to join you today. I have lived in Maine my entire life. I was born in Bangor. I'm actually 9th generation Mainer, and my kids are 10th generation on my mother's side. On my father's side, we're straight off the boat Colombian. My father came to Orono as a graduate student from Bogota, Colombia, and lived in Maine for about 30 years before he retired to Texas. So I feel at the same time very much dyed-in-the-wool member of the Maine community, and also very much an outsider, someone who, you don't meet Carlos Diaz's in Maine every day. So I went to Maine law. I've been practicing in Maine for the last 24, 25 years. My experience as a lawyer began with the Cumberland County DA's office, which I eventually returned to. I've been a DA prosecutor for about 9 years total. I worked at the Attorney General's office for 17 years, doing everything from consumer fraud and white-collar crime to child support and paternity cases to cybercrime and digital evidence, and also was very active with our civil rights enforcement and our school civil rights team program. I worked for just over a year in private practice at Middle Asen in Portland, doing family law under the tutelage of Michael Asen and Diane Ducini, who at the time was the State Bar Association president. And as sort of sideline moonlighting activities, I have been involved as an adjunct law professor at Maine Law, teaching advanced trial advocacy and computer crime courses. I've also taught courses nationally and internationally for the US State Department and the US Secret Service on cyber crimes and digital evidence and cyber terrorism. So kind of a varied bag of experience, but I'm really happy to share with you what my experiences have been as a Latino attorney practicing in Maine, and I look forward to this panel.
Thank you, Carlos.
Who you had in mind next, but I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, I got it. I got a plan. How about Shelley? Good morning, Shelley.
Good morning, Tom. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shelley O'Carey. I am currently an assistant district attorney in Pennsylvania County. I've been in Maine almost 6 years now. Before Maine, I lived in Cleveland, Ohio, where I went to law school and practiced for 6 years at the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland. I did special education law, discrimination, civil rights, centering around youth. And currently I am the Maine Penobscot County juvenile prosecutor. So I'm kind of, that's kind of my area, is focusing on youth. Let's see, I have 3 children, two girls and a boy, and took up a lot of my time, 7, 5, and 3. And I'm excited to be on this panel, and I'm excited about the transition to talking more about these issues that are usually glossed over and ignored. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Shelley. Michael Corey, please.
Hi, good morning. My name is Corey Hinton. My parents, they couldn't decide whether to call me Michael or Corey, so they gave me both names, which has been it's the bane of my existence for years, but please call me Corey. I am a citizen of the Passamaquoddy tribe at Zibayig. I am a shareholder at the law firm of Drummond, Woodsum and McMahon in Portland, and I am the head of our Tribal Nations practice group. In my practice, I predominantly represent tribal nations and their enterprises and organizations and businesses that interact with tribal nations. My practice spans the United States, or as we call it, Indian country, from the Dawnland here in the eastern part of Turtle Island, all the way to California and everywhere in between. I am on my father's side, but we've been here forever. We've been here forever. We were here before the ice melted, and we will be here forever. On my mother's side, my family is immigrated from Western Europe in the 1930s, just prior to the Holocaust. And so I am a survivor of genocide on both sides of my family. I moved to Portland, Maine from Washington, D.C. about 3 years ago. Prior to coming to Portland and to join Drummond Woodsum, I was employed by the law firm of Aiken, Gump, Strauss, Hauer, and Feld in Washington, D.C., where I was a lawyer and lobbyist for tribal nations, primarily representing tribal nations in federal courts and before federal agencies and Congress. I am a father of one daughter, with another one coming in a few weeks, actually, on April 13th. My wife and I are expecting another little girl, which we're really, really excited about. And also have a large Great Pyrenees that we call Quimu, which means loon in Mi'kmaq, and 2 cats. So that's a little bit about me. Thanks so much for having me today.
Thank you, Corey. Congrats on the new baby that's coming. It's
Thank
exciting.
you so much, Tom.
Yes. Shamara, good morning.
Good morning, Tom. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me, Tom?
Yes, I can.
Cool. My name is Shmara Bailey. I'm originally from New York. I moved to Maine to attend law school in 2014. Prior to moving for law school, I visited Maine and fell in love because it was so beautiful and everyone was really nice. After my 1L year, however, I decided to move back to New York to finish law school. I finished law school, then I was still in New York for a bit, and then I decided to move back to Maine. I'm a newly admitted attorney, so I haven't really been practicing as yet, hopefully soon. I'm also a Marine Corps veteran, so my specialty would be to work with veterans. And I like living in Maine.
Thank you, Shamara. Congrats on recently passing the bar.
Thank you.
Kelsey Lee, good morning.
Hi, my name's Kelsey and I'm 3L at Maine Law. Thank you to my classmate Sanchita for inviting me to be on this panel. I think it's important to acknowledge that I am white, but one thing that is really important to me is making sure that law school is both diverse, inclusive, and accessible to everyone who wants to be an attorney or seek a legal education. And so while I've been at law school, I have been president of the Multicultural Law Society and a member of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. And primarily I'm interested in practicing immigration law, so work directly with new Mainers. And so again, these racial justice and diversity issues are really important to me, and I'm very happy to be on this panel and learn from everyone else on the panel as well.
Thank you, Kelsey. And last but not least, Sanchita. Good morning, Sanchita.
Morning, Tom. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Sanchita Mukherjee. I'm a 3L at the University of Maine School of Law in the same year as Kelsey. And I am a new Mainer, as you would say. I moved to Maine in 2018 to study law. That's why I'm here. But I've always dreamed of living in New England. So this is a particular dream come true for me. I'm originally from India, but my family now lives in Florida since 2008. So I have made the conscious decision to live in Maine when Florida was the option. So I feel like I get some props for that. I am really passionate about being a litigator, hopefully in the future. I work at the Cumberland Legal Aid Clinic currently in their general practice clinic and their juvenile justice clinic. And I have a particular passion for the PFA docket. And I was asked to be on this panel as part of the inclusion of the law school in these types of conversations. And I'm really grateful to be here. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you so much. So let me just start by saying that this panel itself, just having a panel like this, is a wonder to me. I came here in 2004. I think I was one of 2 or 3 lawyers of color or BIPOC lawyers that I knew about at that time. Carlos was here before me. I didn't know that Carlos was here though, because I don't do criminal. And so just having a panel assembled with these people, you know, diverse BIPOC practitioners to discuss these issues is a wonder in and of itself. And so to get into our conversation, you know, one of the things that we talk about in the BIPOC community is increasing diversity in our bar, right? Maine, I think everybody understands, is either the whitest state in the country or the second whitest state in the country, depending on what year it is. Sometimes we flip-flop with Vermont. And, you know, the percentage of BIPOC lawyers that we have in the state is also very small. So this is sort of like a rare group, assemblage of lawyers that you have before you. And I want to talk a little bit about why that is. Why aren't BIPOC lawyers flocking to Maine? And so I thought I'd start by asking, particularly the folks that came here from out of state, you know, what's the perception of Maine to out of state BIPOC lawyers? And I can sort of kick it off by saying that when I came here, I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in 2003, and I was interested in going to Boston. And my classmates, my BIPOC classmates, were like, "Are you crazy? You know, Boston's a crazy racist place. You know, Maine is like a step above that. At least it was back then in terms of, you know, what the perception was. Maine was like no man's land. Like you'd be absolutely crazy to go there. Of course, I am here. So I was curious as to maybe some of the panel members could talk about their perceptions of Maine and the legal community up here from the perspective of a BIPOC person.
Yeah, I can jump in. When I moved to Maine because my husband got a position in Maine Medical Center in Bangor, and I would tell people that I was moving to Maine. I moved from Cleveland, as a reminder, and there was usually 2 reactions. One would be, "Oh, Maine's beautiful. I used to summer there as a child. It was gorgeous." Or, you know, Maine is, you know, maybe you don't want to go there because of this perception that it was white, not a perception, it's a fact, overwhelmingly white, but also the connotation that comes with that being, you know, that they're not knowledgeable in people coming from diverse backgrounds. And usually the 2 reactions were based on their backgrounds. If it was a person of color, they would suggest, "You sure you want to move there?" And if they were a white person, they would say, "You know, it's beautiful. I've always wanted to live there. Either I've summered there or I want to visit there." And those are the 2 reactions. So that was my thought. And I had never been to Maine before. So that was my perception before moving here. Luckily, it's not as dire as people made it out to be, but there are things that you know, could be changed, and I'm happy to talk more about that, but I'll let other people respond to that direct question.
I think similar to Shelley, I had the same experience of people of color would say, why? And I don't know if you guys seen the movie Get Out, but they always say, oh, get out. And I'm just like, okay. But between my colleague, like I said, after 1L year, I transferred back to New York. And even my professor would say, don't go back, whatever you do, just stay in New York. And there's this perception that it is very racist in Maine, but I don't, from my experience, it's not as dire or bad as people think it is. But I have tried to encourage my friends to move here, my colleagues, attorneys, and they're like, no, absolutely not.
For the reasons you just stated, right? If there's a perception out there that it's just
absolutely. And so they like
yeah.
my friends would have like a countdown for when I'm coming back. So, but I think also because they've never been here, that might have something to do with it, but that's what it is. At least in my experience.
Right. Kelsey and Sanchita, I wonder if you could maybe talk about this issue from the perspective of the law school and its efforts to sort of increase increase the diversity in its population.
Yeah, so I think Kelsey and I both came from out of state. Kelsey is from Nebraska. I'm from Florida, originally India, but Florida. And it's interesting because Shelley, I had kind of a similar experience where people were like, oh, I would love to visit you. I've summered in Maine. And I was one of those people who would say, oh, I've summered in Maine. And now that I live here, I know just how obnoxious that sounds for Mainers. But what is it? What's the saying? Summer Maine, summer winter, something like that. But I worked in a courtroom, in a circuit court, and there was one magistrate judge, and he was Black, and he had lived in his like former life in New England. And when I told him that I was going to the University of Maine School of Law, he was like very excited for me, very excited that a person of color, was purposefully and intentionally, with other options available to them, moving to, a predominantly white area. And obviously he's a judge, so I felt a little uncomfortable asking him why he felt that way, but I did. And he said, things don't really change unless you are making the effort to go change it yourself. And if you want to experience something different, New England is the most different place you can be from Florida, and you should go explore that. And for me at the law school, I feel like that was certainly my experience. I think I'm the only person of color in my year. I don't know, we have not been in person since March of last year, so I'm not actually sure what the exact makeup of my year is anymore. But even though that may be the case, I feel as though our school does, with its new racial task force, and with kind of the connections that the faculty makes with students, particularly the BIPOC students who choose to reach out, it is creating a more supportive environment than I have personally ever had in my academic career. And I think that's important.
But so, I just heard you say that you think you're perhaps the only person of color in your entire law school class. Did I hear that correctly?
Kelsey, I think that might be right. I think there might be one or two other students who identify as people of color, but I don't feel comfortable saying what they are. So I will just say that I'm a person of color, and I think that I might be one of the few, one of the only.
Right. Well, I can jump in and say, oh, I'm sorry, Kelsey, you go ahead.
I think to Sanchita's point, it is safe to say that our class and other classes are overwhelmingly white, for sure. And one thing that the school is doing and making efforts to do is not only recruit diverse applicants, but make sure that the law school is a good place, an inclusive place to be at once diverse law students enter the building and start their law school program. And I think that's incredibly important, that you're not just recruiting people to make your school look good or to prove that you're diverse, but that you're actually supporting them throughout, and also supporting diverse faculty or staff that you're hiring.
Right. So I can tell you that I've recently spoken to Dean Softly about this issue, and she's her comments are very consistent with what you folks are reporting. She's very supportive, but what she encounters is that BIPOC folks from out of state feel like they're going to be sort of out in the wilderness, so to speak, if they come here, sort of alone, in a stranger in a strange land without a whole lot of support or folks that look like them and have similar backgrounds. So unless anybody else wants to chime in on that question, I thought I'd sort of move on to sort of more like the nitty gritty, what we want to talk about here, and ask if any of you have been made to feel different while operating as BIPOC lawyers here in Maine. What's been your experience as lawyers?
How
Corey.
much time do we have? Because I can go on for a while.
Looks like we've got about 30 minutes left.
I'm just joking. But seriously, I can think to a number of experiences that I've had. And I've only been a member of the Maine Bar for about 2.5 years now. And feeling different for me started the moment I swore the oath. I was in an old, beautiful courthouse, knowing that I was one of, probably less than a handful of people of my tribe that had ever been sworn into the bar. Looking down on me were these large portraits of these old white men in robes that were hundreds and hundreds of years old, knowing that, the people that have served in this courthouse wrote words that refer to my people as imbeciles, that were, out of the benevolence of the state of Maine, were receiving care because we couldn't take care of ourselves. Quite literally, the laws of the state of Maine, Maine's common law, to this day, is essentially structured around the institutional oppression of my people. And so my entire experience in the Maine Bar has been through that prism. And since then, I've had opposing counsel refer to my clients as the Indians when they're Passamaquoddy, they're Penobscot. They're not the Indians. We're not talking about people who are from India. So call people by who they are. How about by their names? And not make generalizations and racial stereotypes. Just recently, I had opposing counsel and trying to explain to me how he was attuned to the racial dynamics in America right now. Say, listen, I know that after George Foreman and those black people were killed by police, that racial tensions have been stressful for Americans. I was like, you mean George Floyd? And, oh, sorry. And then he accused my client of playing the black card, literally. And so this happened to me just the other day. This is a reality of my practice. And I've had other people explicitly, lawyers, bring into negotiations my race, saying, Corey, we know you're Native American. Hey, and I'm of Jewish descent, so I get where you're coming from. It's like, well, you should know that I am Jewish and I am Passamaquoddy. And you should not assume that who I am and where I come from has anything to do with our conversations and how we represent our clients. And, this is the reality of my practice on literally a day-by-day basis. I'll stop there.
Powerful stuff. Shelley, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. Yes, similar to what Corey was saying, but also very different experience. I felt it the moment that I took the oath and I signed the book, just realizing that at the time, not knowing any other people of color practicing in Maine, and for example, it happens quite frequently, less so now that we're in the pandemic, which is kind of sad, because I'm having less interactions with opposing counsel and defendants. But in the before times, at least a weekly basis, a defendant would say, I'd like to speak to a district attorney. I'd present myself as a district attorney. They would look to the left of me, look to the right of me, and say, no, I mean a district attorney. Say it louder as if I didn't understand, they didn't understand the way that I presented myself. That happened on a weekly basis. We have in custodies, sometimes via video, and a defendant that would be in custody would say, like, who's that black lady talking? Like, I'm standing up at the prosecution side, and I'm, presenting the bail argument, and they just, the cognitive dissonance, they can't understand that it can't be her. It must be the officer who's sitting next to me or the witness that's sitting behind me. And even with defense counsel, there's been times where defense counsel have complimented me on my hair, which is perfectly fine, but then reach over to grab it as if I'm a puppy. I'm a human being. So those type of things happen quite frequently. And you just have to, sometimes depending on what side of the bed I woke up on, I try to remain professional and, kind of explain to them that, that's inappropriate behavior. But when this happens constantly, it kind of wears down on you and makes you think, think lesser of your fellow attorneys. Now, of course, that's not everyone. Of course, that's not the case, but rarely does anyone speak up or say anything, maybe perhaps because they're in disbelief, and I'm more experienced at handling those things since I am a Black woman. But even at the, there was a survey that was sent out to the attorneys by the Bar Association, the Maine State Bar Association, about these issues. And one of the first questions was, how often do you interact with a BIPOC person? And I wrote down every day because I am, because it just wasn't focused on me. Like, clearly I just was not, it couldn't possibly be thought that, oh, somebody could be answering this. I understand the purpose of the question, but, like, it could have been phrased so that it could have included everyone. So it's just things like that, constant, subtle and not so subtle issues that, kind of make you feel, different. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much for that. Did anybody else want to weigh in from the attorney perspective? I'm curious to get the perspective of the law students, particularly Sanchita, if they're willing to give it.
I'd like to weigh in on the attorney side of things if I can.
Absolutely.
So again, my experience in Maine may be a little different from the other panelists because I'm born and raised here, and I've always felt like I belonged here, but I've also always felt like I didn't. I'm a very Anglo-looking Latino, but hey, my name says exactly where my father comes from, and I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a court that I don't usually go to, particularly when I worked for the AG's office and I was traveling all over the state doing cases, Washington County, Aroostook County, you name it. And I would show up, and I don't know how many times a clerk or an attorney or a judge would look at me and say, "Oh, you're not what I was expecting. You don't look like a Carlos Diaz." And well, I'm the one you got. I can also tell you, from my experience, Mainers, and being, sort of a dyed-in-the-wool Mainer, I feel like I have some authority to say this. Mainers tend to be very stoic and a little bit cold. It's not just the weather, it's also the personalities. And it takes a while for us to warm up to and reach out to people. And so I think that any BIPOC attorney in Maine is going to experience this sort of initial period where their race, their origins, their ancestry is all that the person in the courtroom is going to see. And you're not just going to be a Black lawyer in the courtroom or a Passamaquoddy lawyer in the courtroom. You're going to be the Passamaquoddy lawyer in the courtroom, and you're going to represent the whole tribe, the whole nation, your whole people. And it takes a while to get past that. It takes a while for the judge, the clerk, the attorneys, the litigants to see you as a real person. And that can be a very painful introduction. I can't tell you how many times I've had judges who have, and I don't attribute any malice to this, but they have referred to me as Mr. Garcia, Mr. Sanchez, fill in the blank Latino name. And this is not just attorneys or judges who are meeting me for the first time. Sometimes this is judges who have seen me month after month after month, year after year. And for whatever reason, I'm just a Latino guy. They need a name to attach to it, so pick a Latino name. And I also, have frequently had the experience where, I'm the prosecutor in some court and we've got somebody Latino who just got arrested who doesn't speak English. I'm the prosecutor and I'm the one they turn to translate for the defendant and explain to him his rights. Now, in sort of a common sense, make do with what you got sense, I can understand that. But on the other hand, I'm the prosecutor. I'm not the token Latino resident translator, jack of all trades. And yet that's the role that I'm cast in. So I don't take offense at that, but I see it as problematic because it's sort of like, before I walk in the room, my race, my ancestry walks in the room before me. So I will say that my experience as a lawyer in Maine has been extremely positive. I have felt like the times when I've taken offense, whether mild or major, at some, something like what I've just described, it has always given way to a recognition that the people who have caused me that offense are not trying to be offensive. And maybe I just give people too much credit, but I don't think so. I really think that we have a very good, caring, concerned bar. But we have a good, caring, concerned bar of stoic Mainers who don't necessarily know how to reach out and warmly embrace someone who doesn't naturally fit into this very white environment. And that's something that takes a little getting used to if you come from somewhere else. The last thing that I just wanted to mention is you get past it. When people get to know you, it gets better. And they see you for who you are and what you bring to the table and what you bring to the courtroom, instead of that name, that skin color, that ancestry, that national origin. But I think that growing up in a very white state, many of the lawyers here do not know how to begin having a conversation with someone about race, about ancestry, frankly, about religion or sexual orientation or a long, long list of things. We're Stoics. We don't talk about these things. You might have very sympathetic, kind-hearted, loving people, but that doesn't mean they know how to have a comfortable conversation about race. And it's really easy to get your nose bent out of shape or your toes stepped on when somebody refers to you as an Indian because they don't know better. So, I mean, Corey, I hear what you're saying. There's a lot of work for us to do to sort of help facilitate a conversation. And right now, especially, I'm curious if the other panelists feel this way as well. Our community is really reaching out to have that conversation, and they just don't know how to do it. So I'm really happy to be a part of the BIPOC section, because I think it gives us an opportunity to try to facilitate a conversation that needs to take place and that the bar really wants to have.
Fantastic. So many excellent points you hit there, Carlos. One of the things that resonated with me was when you said, when you're in so much in the minority, as some of us are, you're not just seen as a person. It's almost like you're an icon, you're an avatar for the entire group. And I can tell you that from my experience, that was true for many, many years. When I'd roll into courthouses in Ellsworth and Bangor and, just places where I wasn't particularly well known, he's the black lawyer. He's the black lawyer. I do want to ask the law students, but I also want to address a question that we just got. It's actually a question to me. It says, as a very experienced trial lawyer, have you had any issues regarding race from an opposing counsel? And I just want to briefly say, I answer that part of the question anyway. The answer is unequivocally over the last 17 years, yes. Too many issues to mention. Just all sorts of things, from inappropriate comments to sort of being dismissed out of turn and sort of put over to the side because somehow you must be less, and so on and so forth. I do want to get in that as the comment that as an attorney of color who is operating a private practice that is statewide, I have also experienced racism, overt racism, unmistakable racism from my own clients and from people on the other sides of cases and so on and so forth. I've been called the N-word in my own office more than once. I had a client once tell me to my face that she did not like Black people, but she was gonna keep me on anyway, you know, out of the goodness of her heart. She's gonna do me a favor and let me continue to represent her. Things of this nature. So, you know, I mean, that's sort of the basic answer to that question. Sanchita or Kelsey, did you want to weigh in on the law student situation?
I'm happy to weigh in. So I think I can separate this into two conversations because Kelsey and I are third years, we have some, certainly not the 17 years of legal experience that Tom, you have, or however long other people have been practicing, but both Kelsey and I work at the Cumberland Legal Aid Clinic. So we have been, we have been in court, we have represented clients to some degree with the supervision of our faculty. So, but before I talk about that, I can just say, as a law school student, at the end of the day, you want to get a job when you graduate from law school, right? So at the end of the day, you want to first be employed and you want to be employable. And in a state like Maine, it's really hard to be employable if you're considered difficult or different or hard to work with, which is fine. I'm lovely. I'm easy to work with. So I'm not concerned about that. But when you're in law school, you are interviewing and you are in interviews and you're in settings where you're one-on-one with people, or sometimes 3-on-1, sometimes like 9-on-1 if it's an important position. And I think that if you are a student of color, if you're a person of color, it's kind of difficult to bring a type of perspective, that type of perspective, a racial justice perspective or a racial lens perspective, when all 9 of your interviewers are white. So I do think that sometimes I have had situations where I'm talking about, my language proficiency or kind of my experiences in the courtroom, which are things that employers want to know about you. They want to know what your experiences have been in the courtroom. They want to know how many times you've set foot in federal court or criminal court or whatever. And if you bring kind of any perspective that's not something that they have experienced themselves, even, if it's critical, it's critical. If it's not, it's not. I have found sometimes that people do get a little defensive when when you say, oh, well, I was in federal court all year, all summer, and I didn't ever see a person of color who was an attorney. That's the truth, but sometimes it does elicit a reaction, which I don't think necessarily is negative. It's just a little defensive sometimes. So I think that in the scope of interviewing as a person of color, I find some of the times when I have conversations or express, thoughts and opinions, it puts my interviewer on the defensive, which I don't want to do, but I do want to be candid with my experiences when I'm talking to an employer. And I want to know that my employer recognizes those experiences and is going to protect me, right? So that's part of it. And then the second part is, have I had, people saying inappropriate things? Sure. There are people who have met me like a dozen times and don't know what my name is or won't pronounce my name. My name is Sanchita. I look very forward to being the first Sanchita Bard in Maine. But it is frustrating when people are so scared to even ask, like, how do I pronounce your name? Because I'll say it a dozen times, I'm fine. I just rather you say, I don't know how to pronounce your name, than just not say my name at all if we're going to be interacting for like 10 hours. So that's been my experience. Kelsey?
Well, again, as a white woman, I think that the way I've experienced law school reinforces the fact that the law school environment is built for certain types of people to be comfortable. And those people look like me. So, for example, in the classroom, if the subject of race comes up, I'm not someone that my classmates look to speak to the experience of someone who's Black, for example. So I don't have that pressure on myself like some of my other classmates might in those situations. So that's just one thing I've noticed in my law school experience, is the way that I am not made to feel uncomfortable. And I think that also goes to a lot of what other people on this panel are saying, that we, in order to move forward and take steps to grow and learn and unlearn to become anti-racist, people who are in the majority need to be made to feel more uncomfortable more of the time, and think about these things and be posed questions about these things and contemplate, maybe why the space is this way and built this way for certain types of people.
Thank you so much. So real quick, I want to follow up on something that Carlos said about how litigants of color or BIPOC litigants are treated in the court system. I wanted to see if anybody else wanted to share their thoughts on that, but I do want to I see we have about maybe 7-8 minutes left, and I do want to get to our final point, which is discussing how we might improve things. And so does anybody want to talk about their observations in terms of how BIPOC litigants are treated in our court system?
I mean, I think there's, I haven't witnessed anything overt, but I think, I shouldn't assume, but the data is out there and it's clear across the country as well as in Maine that people of color, specifically Black people, are disproportionately represented in the prison system in Maine, are disproportionately represented in felonies in Maine, are disproportionately represented in drug felonies. So those things I think are factual that can't necessarily be argued. But I haven't witnessed like overt defendants being, since I'm a prosecutor, defendants being mistreated or whatnot. But I think the prison sentences are longer on average. The sentences are harsher, even given the controlling factors of time, past criminal behavior and whatnot. And I think a lot of that has to do with implicit bias. People aren't actually thinking about it. A lot of it has to do with financials. If you have a certain level of money, then you can hire more experienced attorney, perhaps, as well as defense counsel not necessarily pushing harder for a shorter deal or for a reduced sentence. Prosecutors pushing, not willing to go further down and reducing, and judges more willing to accept higher. So it's just intertwined. But I haven't personally witnessed discrimination on the defendant's side, overtly, but it's all systematic and pretty obvious.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that point, Carlos?
Yeah, as I'll follow up as a longtime prosecutor, I'm very painfully aware of the conversation. My experience over the last 2 years has shown that there is a very high level of commitment among prosecutors' offices throughout Maine and throughout the country in trying to have a really open discussion about, is there an institutional problem? And since we're a part of the institution, are we perpetuating that problem? You get a Black defendant and a white defendant who are charged with the same conduct. One of them is going to get a long sentence, one of them is not. And the prosecutor who recommends that sentence is going to justify it by saying, well, it's not because the person was Black, it's because they had a criminal history that was 7 pages long. And that's how I can distinguish the sentences that I recommended. And that's why I'm not a racist and I'm justified in making that recommendation. And the really difficult conversation that I think is taking place now is prosecutors are being asked to question the assumptions that they make when they look at that criminal history, and to take into account the adverse childhood experiences that might have disadvantaged that Black child in a way that the white child might not have been. And that raises a whole host of challenging issues about, even if you believe that to be true, what do you do with that information? Is there going to be a Black defendant discount because they probably experienced adverse childhood experiences? That sounds overtly racist. So we're really struggling as a whole, prosecutors, with how do we deal with the reality of the fact that we live in a racist society and the results of this system, this prosecutorial system that we're in, are overtly racist. How do we try to fix that without doing it in ways that are also overtly racist. Very difficult conversation to have. The only good news here is the conversation is happening and prosecutors are really showing up to have that discussion. And I'll come back to what I said before. I think that the best I can do as a BIPOC lawyer in Maine is help to facilitate the conversation. I have no magic silver bullet answers. I have no magic wisdom because I happen to be half Colombian. But what I do have is a great deal of comfort in talking about race. And if I can make other people feel more comfortable talking about it, then that's time well spent for me.
Those are great points. What do other folks think in terms of, you know, how do we improve things for BIPOC lawyers and litigants here in Maine? And one of the things that the BIPOC section has been talking about in our meetings is, you know, increasing diversity here, getting more BIPOC folks to move here and to practice here. What are folks thinking? How do we improve stuff, circumstances here in Maine?
For me, it starts with the law school. I mean, I'm happy we're having this dialogue, but I remember there are only 5 BIPOC people in the classroom and 2 of us left because that's how uncomfortable the setting was. I mean, just to have professors not speaking up when someone says something racist was unbecoming. You know, Black students, we will go after class and talk about it. So it was just really that bad. I think that they should teach racial bias at the law school. They should integrate more classes to speak on how the judicial system affects people of color, because it's not uncommon for someone to graduate from law school and the only time they've ever interacted with a Black person is during law school. When they become an attorney, it's their actual first time dealing with a Black client. And so they may have those biases that they're not even aware of. And I think they need to implement classes, I don't know, just something.
Can I just press you on one point that you just made? Did you hear a professor say something racist while you were at Maine Law?
I did. And my classmates did it as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And this is recent, so
I did too.
I know how it is
7
anymore.
years ago, so did I. You know, it's, we can't just assume that because they're in higher education, because they have good intentions, because many of them worked for, you know, civil rights causes in the 60s, that they're somehow enlightened and don't have racism as part of what they grew up with. You know,
right.
And
I mean, just
a better place for the conversation to take place than in a classroom.
Absolutely. And just for point of reference, I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, which had a huge ongoing scandal about one of their professors saying racist things about her minority students sort of en masse. Yeah, right. Her position is that they usually are in the bottom half of the class and so on and so forth. I'm pretty sure I aced her class, just saying. But she's it's interesting. She's been making these comments at a so-called liberal institution like the University of Pennsylvania, and she was allowed to retain her job for quite a period of time now. So, you know, just one of those sort of interesting points of reference. But I guess one of the things I want to wrap up on is that it seems that there's sort of a mixed perception here in terms of what folks are thinking from out of state. I think we all agree. Well, let's start there. I think we all agree that the perception of BIPOC folks from out of state is somewhat negative in terms of you're going to move here, you know, things are generally not going to be favorable for you or ideal for you. But I think there's also at least some sentiment here among our group that things aren't as bad as advertised, right? I mean, do some folks agree with that?
I would add that, you know, things aren't as bad as advertised and things are getting better the more we talk about it. And by it, I mean, like, we're not just talking about racial justice. We're talking about how to make Maine a safer place for everyone. And that includes its BIPOC community. since last year, there have been classes that are being added into the curriculum. I think they should, if you're going to ask my opinion, I think that they should be mandatory classes that everyone else should be taking. But I think a greater shift in the school system and in kind of like the legal community, even in the last 3 years that I've experienced, is that I think people in positions of power are feeling more empowered to show themselves as allies to their students. I think professors are becoming more comfortable being like, I want this to be a safe place for you. I want you to feel welcome here, and not being so like bold about it as to just like single one student out and say, I want this to be a safe place, but facilitating a conversation which really pushes against like that negative and frankly racist commentary that a lot of students feel pretty emboldened to say. I would also say that, opposed to like recruiting people of color in Maine, there are a lot of people of color in Maine who should be staying here and who should feel like they have a place in Maine that will foster their learning environment. So Kelsey and I last year went to Lewiston High, I think actually 2 years ago now, Lewiston High School to speak to high school seniors. And if you had taken a photo of the students that we spoke to, you would not have thought that we lived in Maine. Like, it was a very diverse group of students who are getting recruited to go to other places because they have great programming and great facilities and are, have a better system to support their students of color, which is great. But they're from Maine and they're Mainers. And if they had a place that would provide that same type of support, maybe they would stay here. And I think that the next generation of students, and particularly BIPOC students, might just be from Maine, might just be born and raised here. And I hope that that becomes a reality and that we don't have to be we should be recruiting from out of state, but also we don't have to be.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think one of the things that people from out of state don't realize is that there is a vibrant and growing community of color here already. And sort of on a related point, there are more BIPOC lawyers here in Maine than I think most folks were aware of before we put this section together and actually started compiling everybody in one space a few months ago. And I think that's really important for folks to know and to understand. I see that our handler has appeared. Our time is up.
Here I am, but wow, thank you all so much. For those of you that can't see the question and answer, we don't have questions necessarily, but I want to tell each of the panelists how important I think our membership has thought this panel was. They really appreciate you being so honest and open with your experiences. As one person said, it's one thing to know intellectually about the systematic racism that's existing, but this really brings it home for a lot of our members. So we really greatly appreciate your time today. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
And I'll hand it back over to Chris Lewis.
Thank you, Chrissy. Again, Tom and all the rest of the panelists, I would just want to say again, thank you so much for doing this. We need to hear this. I need to hear this. And I just really commend you all for your willingness to be on this panel and be so open and honest with your experiences. This is something that is important to the MTLA. We pledge to continue this process. This is not the beginning. This is not the end. This is just the very start. And this is something that needs to happen and will continue to happen. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for attending our presentation today. And I hope you found it as informative as I did. And I want to thank Chrissy Mann and Mike Begas, our CLE co-chairs, for putting this great program on. I'm going to ask everybody, please, all MTLA members, please come to the business meeting at 1 o'clock. We do need to conduct some brief MTLA business, including the election of new officers. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much. And I will see everybody, all the MTLA members at 1 o'clock, about half an hour. And as always, if you have any questions relating to today's seminar, I want you to feel free to send them to either myself, Steve Prince, or Lori Box-McComber. and we will get the questions answered and get the answers out to our membership. Thank you.